This is the Bush Whisperer, and I'm walking back from the beach, walking along into the penguin sanctuary. It's Cape Agulhas, and I'm going to take you with me for my walk as we talk about fear. What is fear? Fear is an interesting one. I like to think of fear as phi. We know what phi is. It's a mathematical equation that comes from ancient Greece. And air. Air is, well, it's both the air that we breathe, and it's also the mistake. To err is human. Phi air. So it's the mistake that life can make. I like to consider it in such a term. For life is phi, that mathematical agency that produces the sphere through which consciousness can touch and become manifest. And it's reflecting these divine equations of mathematics, which are the body of Maat, as the ancient Egyptians used to call these principles. So fire, fear, air, is something that comes from deep within. We tend to run away from fear. Shaman have a different perspective about fear. We tend to see fear as a gift, as an opportunity. I spent much of my life running towards fear, seeing fear as a gateway to the deeper aspects of the self, and holding in consciousness that by facing and resolving these fears, I get closer to the true nature of my being. And fear always begins with a fundamental root. The fundamental root of all fear is death. When we contemplate fear to its extremity, that's where it begins, and that's where it ends. Excuse me, I stepped into a hole on the beach. So, considering fear as the cousin of death gives us an insight into understanding that when we're getting closer to fear, we're getting closer to the nature of life and death, closer to the understanding of what life and death truly are. And so fear is truly one of the greatest gifts that's been given to humanity, and we run from it. Though it's also a healthy signal. There are two different kinds of fear. There is instinctual fear, fear which is natural. There's a fire, you don't want to get burned, so you run from the fire. That's natural instinctual fear. Then there is a human condition. And it's the fear of the human condition of which I speak here, specifically. For natural fear is a natural phenomenon. We experience it in the most normal and healthy way. It's a protective sheath around our consciousness. It will prevent us from making errors and doing things that can cause harm to our bodies or our minds. But the unnatural fear, that's the gateway. And we tend to find that this unnatural form of fear is a condition that's also been, how can I say, there's a certain element of engineering behind fear. Much of the fear that we have is engineered by systemic programming. The media loves to program fear into our consciousness. The news, the schools love to program fear into our consciousness when we're children. If you don't do this schoolwork, you won't be able to get a job one day. You won't be able to work, feed your family, and you'll end up in a bad situation. Everything that we do seems to be hanging upon this crucible of fear. And I get this impression that it's not just a coincidence that when somebody wishes to control another human being, fear is normally the easiest way to do this. It's the simplest, most direct way to actually reaching into another person's soul and controlling their responses, what they do, their thoughts, their actions. This is why abusers will often use fear in order to manipulate someone into doing what it is they wish for them to do. So fear is something to be considered as an important facet of consciousness that needs to be understood, observed, and brought into balance. Because if we don't face our fears, if we don't resolve our fears to some extent, then we can easily be manipulated and controlled by control structures, by the media, by Big Brother, by whoever it is that you're afraid of. And there's a lot of fear these days. I mean, look at what just happened with this viral situation. That was a huge fear trigger being pulled by corporations, where there were financial aims and goals clearly, and structures of control to be implemented in order for those financial instruments to be turned into a legacy, sadly. So fear is something that is both macrocosmic and microcosmic in its implications. It limits us personally within ourselves. It locks us into limited states of consciousness. Though because it locks us into limited states of consciousness, it's also the trigger that can be pulled, that can be faced and released in order to free us from the limits of consciousness that we've imposed upon ourselves. And this is how the shaman understands fear. Fear is a spiritual trigger. And when you face it and pull the trigger, face what will be, there is a sense of liberation. There is something that brings one closer to the sense of free. One is able to just observe and be. I know in my life, when I faced death, I have felt incredible, powerful forces moving. Incredible, intense realizations, experiences of non-physicality, of the great beyond, understanding the nature of the dream, the three dreams. This all happens when one learns to face one's fear. It's quite scary to travel out into the unknown. It's quite scary to face oneself in such a very naked way. Fear makes us naked. Fear strips away the illusions. Because when we're afraid, we don't have time for illusions. We have to be. We have to just accept, be, and move through the fear. And this is what brings a shaman into the deep state of trance very often. Because in the trance, one will experience so many aspects of oneself. Fear will be one of them. And it will need to be resolved. So shamans spend a lot of their time in the wilderness. And they face their fears. It's a big part of the shamanic path. I swam out to sea. I connected with large power animals. Did things that other people probably wouldn't do. Things that might be considered very dangerous. Though this was all part of the training, all part of the path. It was informed to me from other shaman, from a great shaman, that facing this fear was the key to uncovering my connection to the inner, my connection with the guides, my connection with what is the deepest aspect of myself, in order to enter into the shamanic trance. So fear is something that we shouldn't disregard. We should always observe fear and realize that fear is also a sign. Very often when we're afraid, and the shaman understands this very well, we are getting closer to ourselves. Fear is almost like a signal. It's almost like a light that goes on, as if to say, pay attention. Like, it's time to awaken now. And the fear only comes when those moments are getting closer to the heart. For fear is an essence of the heart. It's when we lock our hearts into itself and we put sort of limiters upon our hearts. These limiters are experienced as fear. So fear is experienced when we transcend our limitations. This is why we are often afraid of new experiences. This is why people can be afraid of new ideas. This is why people can be afraid of people they don't know, new people, afraid to express themselves in a crowd of strangers. And fear is something that is also quite deeply connecting. Because when we observe our fear, we notice that everybody else is afraid. And we notice it's something that we share with all other beings. Well, humans especially the unnatural kinds of fear. Though fear is also part of life. And so we understand that this nature of death and transcendence and the recycling of life force is something that we're all incredibly afraid of. Because we've named it. We've named it death. We've named it the end. And so this is one of the reasons why fear becomes so challenging. Because when you enter into one fear, it takes you deeper into a fear. It's like going into the sea. You don't just keep going out into the sea and then you're less in the sea than you were before. It doesn't work that way. The deeper you go into the sea, the further you go out, the more apparent becomes the danger. You can go far out enough to see that you won't be able to see the land, and I can tell you that's a scary place to be. When you don't know which way the land is, because you can't see it, it's so far out to sea. I don't mean with a boat, or a surfboard, or a canoe. I mean when you're just swimming. It's pretty scary. And you don't have to go that far. You go out a kilometer, you swim a kilometer out to sea and you won't be able to see which way the land is. I tell you, it's shocking. Luckily, you've got the sun to guide you back. And so when we are in a state of fear, remember the sun. And it's not just a metaphor for when you're out at sea, but sea is a great metaphor for fear. Look to the life force. Feel the life force pulsing through your heart. Breathe. For when you breathe, you channel that life force into your body and into your consciousness. And the breath of the life force resolves the patterns of fear in the most natural and simplest of ways. So all you've got to do when you're really afraid is just breathe. Breathe deeply. Breathe with consciousness. Allow the rhythm of the breath. This is how a shaman would do it. Allow the rhythm of the breath to become a soothing sensation that guides the heart to the deeper place of peace, that harmony might be expressed through the whims of consciousness, the same whims that have expressed fear. And so we realize that the whole universe is literally an emanation from our perception and our awareness, streaming through our eyes. And we get to choose which aspect of the reality we will choose to experience at any moment. And so fear is that great and powerful liberating emotion. That which we run from is that which we should embrace. This is the Bush Whisperer speaking about fear. Hope you have an absolutely awesome day. Enjoy the gorgeousness and the beauty of the world around you. Life is very short, and don't let fear inhibit you or restrict you. Face your fears, take them down. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.